Welcome to our Managing the Planet for tonight. This is our second one of the semester. Do we have a retirement here? Was somebody here retired? I thought there was I thought there was a party here for somebody retiring. So anyway, we must have missed it. Oh, okay. We wish. Anyway, so tonight we're going to talk about renewable energy transition and what that really means to the citizens and industries of Colorado. And if you haven't been in this before, it's really just a conversation. So I'll provide a brief introduction of our distinguished panelists. They'll provide an overview of their backgrounds and what they're working on currently. And then we open it up to questions from the audience, and you can go from anything. I guess you can almost ask anything at this event. And then if you are going to ask a question, it'd be great to know who you are. And then we'll kind of, you can plug anything you want to plug if you're doing that. Just a couple of brief announcements. So, again, this is sponsored by the School of Global Environmental Sustainability at CSU. If you want more information about sustainability, you go to sustainability@colostate.edu, and that's the site you want to get to, and it has all the events that they have going on during the school year and throughout the summer. One event of note is the Africa and Ale event, which is in April. That's a ways down the road, but that's a great one to go to, 4 to 6:30. That's over at the University Center over on Remington there. It's a fundraising event looking at, and you get to sample African-style beers created by local brew makers and stuff. So if you get a chance, go over to see that. It's really a great outfit. So tonight we're going to talk about the renewable opportunities in Colorado. We have a distinguished panel, and I'll just run down their very brief bios, and then they'll all have an opening remark. First and foremost, Jesse Burkhardt. I was doing it alphabetically. Jesse is assistant professor in the Department of Ag and Resource Economics, and he specializes in environmental and energy economics. He teaches energy economics, ecometrics, and has research in energy and air quality and air pollution. So Jesse, welcome to the panel. Next, Ellison Carter. Ellison, thank you for joining us. Ellison's an assistant professor in civil and environmental engineering. Her research combines interests and expertise in air quality, exposure science, and chemistry, and aims to answer questions relevant to energy policy, housing, transportation planning, and their impacts on air pollution and exposure and human health. Thank you very much for being here, Ellison. Carol Dollard, a frequent member of the panel for the last 10 to 12 years. She's the energy engineer at facilities management here at CSU, co-chair of the President's Sustainability Commission here. Carol also manages and designs installation of renewable energy systems on campus, such as solar arrays. She also leads a team that conducts university annual greenhouse gas inventories and produces updates on CSU's climate action plan. Maybe we can talk a little bit about that at some point. And then finally, my colleague, Mark Uchanski. Mark's an associate professor in the Department of Horticulture and Landscape Architecture. He serves as Colorado Specialty Crops Program lead. His work includes conducting research on sustainable and organic practices, inputs, where they're applicable in Colorado. So anyway, we'll start off the discussion. So Mark, maybe I'll start with you. Maybe just some brief remarks about your program and your work in energy. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks so much for hosting this and organizing this, and thanks for attending tonight. As Gene said, thanks for the introduction. My name is Mark Uchanski, and I work mostly in vegetable cropping systems. And kind of as that relates to renewable energy, back in 2019, we received some funding to investigate this concept of agrivoltaics, which is combining the word agriculture with photovoltaics, so agrivoltaics. And when I was first approached by that topic, or by somebody in the solar industry about that topic, I said, that's crazy. Why would you use the same resource, light, that you use to grow crops to also harvest energy? And so that's the way I started with that whole process, and now we're 4 years in and 4 seasons in, and we keep learning new and interesting information about co-location of, in this case, vegetable crops and solar panels or photovoltaics or agrivoltaics. So I've learned a lot over the past four years, and we'll probably keep on going with that research line for a while.
Well, that's great. We'll have a lot of questions for you tonight. Okay, Ellison.
Thanks. So as Gene said, I'm in the Civil and Environmental Engineering program, and I'm an environmental engineer by training. I've done a lot of interdisciplinary projects, so when I speak about projects that I am involved in, it's usually involving a lot of different people. Don't want to pretend to speak just for myself up here. My work in household energy really began with work outside of the United States, where people tend to use more solid fuels for cooking and heating. So I've done a lot of work in China looking at household energy transitions that happen at the household and village scale. And since I've arrived here 5 years ago or so, I've been trying to embed myself in communities throughout the Front Range, down to Denver, to understand how housing transitions that involve changes in energy systems impact people's lives. I've looked at that a lot from the perspective of exposure to air pollution, both indoors and outdoors, and how that affects health. But increasingly, I've gotten to work with some pretty fantastic people that come in from the social science side to try to understand what the change in an energy system in the home does to your livelihoods, your well-being. And so some of the projects that I work on currently are trying to expand our understanding of impacts of energy transitions in the home.
Great, thank you. Jesse.
Okay, let me think for a moment. How does my research relate to energy? So I think I probably learned most about energy from teaching energy economics. I have one of my students back there. It's good to see you. That's fun because I get to keep up with all of the research in energy economics and teach it every year. It's a very dynamic class. In terms of my own research, what I work on mostly is like residential energy demand, getting people to change their consumption patterns. So if you ever get those notices at home from for your water bill or from Excel that says you use this much relative to your neighbors, those are the types of experiments that we dream up and we see how those work. And then we have price changes, of course. As an economist, I have to tell you that people respond to prices. And so we think about how to make prices, electricity prices, residential electricity prices reflect what's happening in the wholesale market, so that you do things like charge your electric vehicle when wholesale prices are low. So
Great.
that's in a nutshell what I do.
Okay, Carol.
Okay. Carol Dollard, I work in facilities at CSU. I'm not an academic, although I do have 2 degrees from CSU, both in mechanical engineering. I do a lot of work in energy efficiency and renewable energy, as you mentioned in my bio, but I had to laugh when Ellison was saying, yeah, a lot of what I do, I have to thank a lot of other people. Nobody works in a vacuum, right? We all have to say that it takes a village to do these projects. But we've done some pretty cool things on campus over the last couple of decades that I've been here, including just wrapping up a project where we added 20 new solar sites to campus, doubling the amount of solar sites on campus, and we are up to 11.2 megawatts, and we're really excited and proud about that because 14 years ago, we had 0, none, nada. So just for a history lesson, the first one on campus was the 18.9 kilowatt one on the engineering building, and it was the largest one in the city at the time in 2009.
So what's our percentage, like in terms of?
You don't want to know that.
Okay, never mind.
You know, well, I will tell you, the university uses 175 million kilowatt hours in a year.
Wow. Okay.
So just, that takes a lot of solar panels. We're working on it,
Yeah.
but it's still single digits, but we're almost to 10%.
That's cool.
Okay.
Great. All right. Thank you very much, all of you. Anybody want to start with the first question? And if you don't, then I will start with my questions. But the first question, it's always a shy person. Somebody want to get up and ask a question? Okay, I'll do it. So Mark, I'll start with you. Tell me what really some of the advantages of this agrivoltaic stuff is. Like, I understand the solar panel part of it. What about the ag part of it? Like, what are you really getting out of that? Yeah.
So the idea is using the same plot of land, so co-locating agriculture and energy production without necessarily sacrificing a whole lot of either one. So the idea would be on the same plot of land, if a farmer might be struggling or may have a limited amount of land and needs an additional income stream, in addition to growing a crop that would be traditional, you can also then harvest energy off of that same plot of land. So co-location of the two. And there's always going to be a trade-off between how much energy you're generating and how transparent the panels are and how much crop you're going to be able to produce. But when combined, In the best case scenario, you can have both and have more income than you would have than just with the one. So that's an income component. There's also in certain parts of the country where we have abundant light, but not as abundant water. We can actually produce a little bit of shade for a crop. Lettuce comes to mind, and that actually still is enough light for the lettuce crop and enough light to generate electricity. So we're in a good part of the country for that. And the final one that's probably pretty important before I kind of pull it all together into a nexus would be water retention. It's sometimes kind of billed as water savings, but it's not really that. It's more like stretching the water that we apply to a crop to grow the crop. With a shaded situation, you have less sunlight hitting the soil surface, less sunlight hitting the leaves, and so it doesn't release as much water from the crop itself. And so the water that's applied can be retained in the soil, and so it can kind of stretch it out for longer. And when we tie all those together, and it sounds a little utopian, and it's still being worked out for each different unique scenario, but you get this nexus of where food, water, and energy are kind of coming together in the same space and trying to work that out. And that's a lot of what our work is to try to kind of figure out what those details are, where not to make mistakes if you were to do it again, and that type of work.
Super. Carol, go ahead. Yeah, follow up. Anybody can follow up at any time.
I just want to add on because we get brought in when we're bringing PV on campus because everybody wants to care about the electrical engineering side, and frankly, the ag guys don't know much about electrical engineering. I don't either, but I have friends in that area.
Right.
But on the western slope, we're doing agrivoltaics research at Fruta or Orchard Mesa, I think. Grapes or apples, I can't remember, but it has to do with reducing sun scald. I mean, there's that co-benefit. And then also one of the, I told you we just did 20 sites in our latest solar round. One of those is a 300 plus kilowatt site at Ardec that can be used as a sheep pasture. Now you can't automatically do that. You have to, we call it wire management. You can't have the wires where the animals can chew on it or get tangled in it or whatever. But we planned that one to be a sheep pasture so we get around that. The land use conflict, if we take out 30 acres like we frankly did 10 years ago on Foothills campus, and we built it in a way that it can't be pastured, that's a problem. You're taking 30 acres of pasture or production out. And so we're trying to be smarter now. It's like, how can ag and solar work together? Wind and ag have been working together forever because wind has a pretty small footprint, but solar, there's a lot of advantage. And it turns out in hot, sunny climates, the sheep like the shade of the solar panels. So there's lots of co-benefits there, and we're headed down that road. And again, we're learning what to do and what not to do.
Great. Questions? Here we go. Over here.
I'm going to follow up on the solar panels over the crop thing. Are they also changing how their method of watering so that they don't use as much water, like as opposed to like flood irrigation? Are they changing to something else?
Usually, when you have this integration of the two, you would either shift away from flood irrigation and maybe shift to a drip irrigation system, or maybe short sprinklers that would kind of operate under the solar panels. So that shift there is an efficiency move, and not as compatible with flood irrigation, but that's a good thing. That's a good change from a conversion from flood to other types of irrigation.
Oh, super. Question over here.
Hi, my name is Mark Haudeschelt. I had also a question about the photovoltaics. I had read recently that they're developing some new type of solar panels because since the photons used for solar energy are usually the more energetic ones, the UV and stuff, and the crops need more of the infrared, that these solar panels can just absorb what they need and they allow the other light to pass through to the crops. Are those fairly common now, or is that a new development?
So the term that I've heard to support or to describe that would be tunable. So just have the solar panels absorb the wavelengths of energy that can be used for electricity generation, and allow, let's say, other wavelengths that the plants would use for photosynthesis through, and then even make the system more efficient than it would be with just the current situation of opaque panels that absorb almost everything. It's not common yet. There's a lot of interest in kind of integrating that into greenhouse structures, for example. where you have that glass glazing there in the first place. So why not generate electricity with that same structure and allow enough of the photosynthetic light through for the crop to be able to grow? So it's not there yet. It's not common yet. This tunable kind of at the wavelength level and the color of light, if you want to think about it that way. However, what is becoming more common is the transparency types of panels. And that's one area where we're currently doing research is think about kind of a light gray pair of sunglasses and how much light comes through those, like 40% of the light coming through or so. Those semi-transparent panels are a more common technology right now to let the same type of light through for both the crop and the panels, but it lets more light pass through the panels to allow more to get to the crop. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, Jesse, go ahead, pick up. Yeah.
Is there anybody else am I taking?
No, you just
Okay.
follow up. This is your role.
So one of the challenges with agrivoltaics is you put the solar panels way out in eastern Colorado, for example, and getting that electricity to the grid, so transmission. And you've worked on putting solar panels on CSU campus and other places. How have you dealt with the utilities to get that power to the grid and the transmission?
Well,
Has it been a challenge?
working with the utility is always a challenge. I don't know if any of my friends are from the utility. I used to work in the electric utility industry, so they have their rules. They've got to keep all of you safe, that you want the lights to turn on when they turn on, so they have their opinions about reliability and safety and all that. And you have to deal with all that. But the round of solar all the solar that we have done on campus has been what we would call behind the meter, because CSU is a master metered campus. So imagine that the entire main campus has one electric meter. It's not quite true, but essentially. So everything we do, so all we've done with all the solar we've put on campus is slow that meter down a little bit, okay? So that's not totally true completely. The one we have on Foothills campus does actually, we used to use the parlance, spin the meter backwards. We push back out onto the grid. Sometimes, like Saturday when Foothills campus is kind of quiet and it's a good sunny day. But for the most part, we consume all our solar electrons ourselves. We don't share. So it makes it a little, we still have to deal with all the interconnection agreements and all the requirements and legal and safety and liability and all those fun things. And that's just part of the fun parts of the job, but that don't have anything to do with engineering. All my training have nothing to do with that. But for the most part, it's not like we're putting it in eastern Colorado, trying to sell it into the grid and then buy it later. That's not what we're doing.
Jesse, yeah, go ahead.
It's the location that makes the difference. Okay, I got it. Thank you.
Yeah, great. We got a question here.
Mainly for Carol. Could you update us on the geothermal aspects of, I guess it's West Campus, but also, can it scale? I mean, I understand we did a lot of it because, it's sort of the green thing to do, but is it really cost effective and something that we would scale throughout the university?
Great question.
Yeah.
For those of you that don't know, the Moby complex, which is about 400,000 square feet if you count the whole thing, is now heated and cooled with a ground source heat pump. We call it a geo-exchange system. There's a giant heat exchanger, 342 wells, 550 feet deep. I can memorize that. 70 miles of piping, U-shaped piping that goes down the wells and comes back. So we're just exchanging energy with the ground. We're not exchanging water, so we're not polluting aquifers. And we use that energy in the wintertime, you extract heat out of the ground, and in the summertime, you put heat in the ground. You run heat pumps in the building, and so Moby is now using half the energy it did before we made that conversion. The old steam system was not exactly efficient, and much of that equipment went to the age of the building. We were replacing 60-year-old pieces of equipment when we made the conversion. So it has worked great. I will say geo-exchange is a really tough sell because it's a high upfront cost. It's the best, in many cases, it's the best life cycle cost, but you always have to ask for more money up front, which isn't always easy. But we have plotted a campus scale GeoX field, and you guys would love where we're plotting this. We talk about land use. You guys know where the floodplain is between the Hilton and the Veterinary Teaching Hospital? Well, you can't put anything in it. It's actually a floodway. And for those of you that were here in 1997, it was 30 or 40 feet underwater. But you can't put anything in a floodway, anything, except below ground. So we could put a giant well field down there, and we can't do anything else with that plot. We've had talks about putting, soccer fields down there, but that's perfectly compatible with well fields too. So we're plotting that. A lot of that's really long-term. We have a lot of things to do on campus first. I always tell people your greenest kilowatt hour is the one you never use. So instead of thinking about the next coolest way of how you get energy, is just work really hard on using less of it.
So if we were to put more solar panels in, or the geothermal, which one would you say is the best way to go?
Right now, solar is definitely quicker payback.
Okay.
Yeah, great. We have a question back here.
As a recent CSU alum who wants to go into environmental consulting, how do you go about convincing either organizations or communities to actually transition into more renewable energy?
Okay, Jesse or Ellison? Somebody's got to grab that one. Go ahead.
Well, that's a good question. I'll start with that. This is where I think economics kind of ends, and I usually tell my students to go, okay, so economists, we can put bounds on these things. We can say, here's the benefits, here's the costs, and we can hand them to you, but then it takes, we can't make you do anything with that, right? So I think at that point you need to start getting into, I don't know, some other discipline, political science or something, where you take results and you can translate that into actionable actions. I don't have much experience with getting people to actually do the things I say in my research.
Ellison, a comment?
I'll follow up, not because I have more experience getting people to do what we want, but we have a lot of experience evaluating how people respond to interventions. In sort of the household energy realm, that can take a lot of different shapes. It can be in the form of a new appliance that's given, maybe with a full subsidy, maybe with a partial subsidy, maybe selected, sort of naturally without any external incentives, at least from our research perspective. We try to do work recently in more of a natural experiment type realm. So for instance, in Beijing, there's been a push to eliminate coal as a fuel for space heating in millions of people's homes, not in the city center. Since the Olympics in 2008, coal use in the city center that most people are familiar with has been banned, but that ban hasn't extended to the rural parts of the province until more recently. And so in that case, it's mandated by the government, but that uptake can be still quite variable. So maybe to your question around, how do we get people to do things? I think understanding them and the kinds of decisions that they're faced with more holistically is a really good starting point. That's a pretty vague answer and seems like a cop-out, but really, I think if I've learned anything, it's that people will make decisions that benefit them in their household, but the timing of that decision, the context in which that decision's made, maybe they just moved into a new home, maybe they just had a child, maybe they just joined with another family or separated from a family. Those kinds of major life events are really opportunities to think about transitions. And I would encourage anyone interested in trying to get people to do things we want is to think about what their incentives already are. And I think I've studied that at the household level, but I think that that's also evident at larger scales, like municipal levels. So for instance, in the city of Fort Collins, there's an energy efficiency program that's been ongoing for a long time, but it's largely been used by upper to middle income households that live in single family homes. And in trying to think about how to address rental housing, where the energy efficiency is usually the poorest, that involves incentivizing the property owner in addition to the people that live there. And so that's a much more complex system, and I think warrants engagement with those stakeholders along the way. So.
That's great. Jesse, you had a comment? Good.
I think I can do slightly better. So I think if you really want to make people change their behavior, I'll go back to the prices thing. You have to work with regulators. So you have to think about what are the economists call these things externalities. What are the bad things coming out of using fossil fuels? Bad things are the greenhouse gases, the local pollutants that get into your lungs, can give you asthma. So right now, those are externalities in the sense that the markets don't have a price for those things. So one thing you could do is go work with your regulators to put a price on those things. It could be a tax, it could be a cap and trade program, but something that makes producing energy with fossil fuels more expensive. It actually makes it reflect the social cost of producing electricity with fossil fuels. And if you do that, that's going to make renewables much more competitive. It's going to make the relative cost of renewables look better compared to fossil fuels. That's
Great, Carol.
That's my answer.
And just want to add, life cycle cost, like I'm blessed that I work for a university that has a long-term vision. Not all institutions have that. And when you can put things on the table like the MOBI GeoX system, it is not the lowest first cost, but after 8 years we'll be even, and after that we'll be money ahead. Those kind of arguments buy you a lot. And we just finished a district energy master plan where we're talking about getting rid of steam entirely on campus that is fired by natural gas, by the way, and moving to an electrification of that system, because if you guys don't know, our electric grid is headed to 100% renewable by 2030. So the more we can electrify, the easier we can lower carbon. And looking at funding that, it's very upfront loaded in terms of capital cost, but when you do a 60-year life cycle cost, I presented it to our CFO and she looked at it and she goes, I want option 2. And I'm like, yes, you do. And it's an easy sell for people that have that long-term vision. You can't sell it if they expect a payback in 2 years. That's not going to happen.
Okay, comment here.
Hi, my name is Wally Jacobson. I live here in Fort Collins. And I have a question concerning not only the generation of renewable energy, but the storage of it. That's a huge component, and we kind of hear more and more about the storage end of it that is becoming more apparent in terms of meeting demand, of course, during the nighttime hours if you're looking at solar, and that kind of thing. So, I mean, the battery technology is kind of interesting. That's evolving too. And I'm thinking transportation-wise, lithium-ion batteries, and then there's another addition out there that's being researched as well. But could anyone speak to the storage side of things and then the battery technology? That would be kind of interesting. Thank you.
Battery technology. Good, Jesse.
So batteries are getting cheaper. That's good. We have one of the things that I think is coming is companies like Ford and GM are selling electric cars, but they're thinking of it in terms of they're selling mobile batteries. And their cars are going to start, I think the Ford Lightning already does this, where it can charge from the grid, but it can also sell power back to the grid. And so what they're going to do is they're going to become what are called aggregators. And once you buy one of their cars, you're going to either sign up for their program or not, but a lot of people will probably sign up for their program where maybe you have 100,000 F-150 Lightnings on the road, and Ford says, okay, we can charge these batteries when the price of electricity is low, and then discharge the batteries when the price of electricity is high. So there's an arbitrage opportunity there, and they're going to give you a cut of some of that that difference in price, and they're going to, of course, take a cut of it. But we need companies like that to organize car owners. So that's one of the main areas of battery storage, and then there's grid level storage. Maybe you know more about that. Do you have anything to say?
There's some interesting stuff going on at grid level storage because turns out in an automobile, when a battery is at something like 70% of life, it's too tired to really run a car effectively. And they've been taking those lightly used batteries, putting them together in packs and putting them at substations and using them because utility can use it much more effectively and doesn't care about how fast they can go from 0 to 60, right? So there's a lot going on there. I'm definitely not an expert in batteries, but I also want to remind you, remember I mentioned we're talking about a whole new system to replace steam on campus. There's large thermal storage tanks associated with that. You don't always have to store energy in a battery. You can store it in hot and cold water too, so that you can change the time of use when you need electricity. You can charge your tanks at a time of day when maybe you have renewable energy available.
Jesse, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, so the largest battery system right now is in Australia, I think. At least it was a couple of years ago. And just another follow-up on that, as they become cheaper, they're going to really dominate electricity production, because you can buy electricity on the wholesale market if you're a battery owner for when it's cheap in the middle of the night, and then you can instantaneously dispatch it in the afternoon when the wholesale price of electricity is expensive. And so you get this really big margin on how much you paid for the electricity versus how much you're selling it for. And it's instantaneously dispatched compared to like fossil fuels, which have to ramp up, and renewables, which are intermittent. You can't guarantee they're going to produce at any particular time. So batteries are going to be great.
Yeah, I have a follow-up, maybe a question here. So Jesse, who does that? Like who? I mean, is it Excel or just like?
Yeah, Excel could do it.
Or Jesse Burkhardt?
If I had enough money, yeah, I could do it.
Okay. Okay. But it would be an Excel, a power company would come up with a system.
Rawhide, Rawhide's the producer of electricity up north here.
Right.
They could buy a battery, but it's right now it's prohibitively expensive.
Right.
But the costs are coming down.
Right.
They have a 2 megawatt hour battery they're installing or have recently installed. I don't have all the details, but Platte River is playing in batteries up at Rawhide.
That's great.
Okay, cool. Okay, we have a question here.
Yeah, I have a question about grid storage and wondering if you might be familiar with an article that I read about a year ago involving Xcel Energy. They had proposed an experimental storage with the Hayden Power Station. Does this sound familiar? Okay.
Is that hydro?
No,
Hayden's
it's
It's a coal plant. Okay.
Carnot. It's taking salt and melting it. So what they had proposed or had planned to propose was to bring grid power in during the day, surplus solar and wind, to go ahead and melt the salt instead of using the sun directly. And then they said in the article that the plant would be able to produce what it's supposed to produce, which I'm assuming might be several hundred megawatts for 10 hours in the evening. Have you heard anything about this?
I have heard about, yeah, it's basically heating up the salts and storing the heat, right? So there's a lot of different technologies for these things, right? And all of them are associated with a cost. And right now, what you really need to think about is what the cost of purchasing something like that is relative to producing electricity with the technologies we already have. And the problem right now is that batteries are up here, fossil fuel production is down here. And so as any battery technology, if we can bring the cost down and make it cheaper than fossil fuel production, and we have a whole bunch of renewables, then we can put fossil fuels out of business. But that's a long ways away.
But that happens, though, because we were talking about natural
I gotta
gas
talk
15
about-
years ago, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, right.
And I want to just
Yeah.
add to your grid,
Yeah.
batteries are up here and coal is up here, and you guys know that new wind beats even old coal now, so.
Question.
So I wanted to know if you'd heard about a proposal to, as we remake the grid, to use direct current instead of AC current. And if so, how does that impact what you're doing with providing the energy, as getting it to people? Because that's really a big thing. I mean, I would like every house to be self-sufficient, but I'm not sure if that's a practical thing. So in terms of the grid, thank you.
It's Carol, good. That was a tough question.
I am not an electrical engineer, and we're all looking at each other going, we need a double E on the panel for that one.
Right.
I know some things that have been done locally, because if you have, for those of you that don't know, solar panels produce DC power. So if you could run your building off of DC power, you wouldn't have to convert it to AC and then run all your devices. And oh, by the way, your laptop then converts that AC to DC to run your laptop. So why are we converting it twice? So I know they've had some conversations. We almost built a city hall in Fort Collins that was DC wired. I will just say the insurance companies threw it off the rails, but that's the shortest answer. It was actually a cheaper option, but in terms of grid scale, the grid is a giant, enormous, expensive thing, and to think about building a whole new grid in a whole new way is probably more. And in case you don't know, there is DC on the grid because the AC grids are broken up in chunks in the United States, and the only way they connect are through DC ties. So there is some DC on the grid in a way to make them not have to talk to each other, but I doubt the grid at a grand scale would ever go to DC.
Okay, we'll follow up. A question back here.
Hi, my name is Zarif Rasul. I'm a PhD student at the Agriculture and Resource Economics at CSU. So going back to solar panels, how big of a concern is the safe disposal of solar panels, and what steps are being taken to reduce the e-waste? Thank you.
E-waste on solar panels?
Could you say it a little bit louder? Sorry.
He's worried about e-waste on solar
How big of a concern is the e-waste from solar panels?
Does anybody do life cycle assessment? I don't know enough about that to really talk about that, sorry.
I can say that I grew up in a town known as the Rocket City, and we have been using solar panels in space since the 1950s, actually, and they last forever. They degrade in quality, but you can still, it's sort of like those batteries that we take them out of cars and we put them in substations. We can take solar panels out of large, places where they may have to repower them to get more energy, and then you could still take those. I actually talked to a woman the other day, her nonprofit takes used solar panels and puts them on habitat houses.
I'm Jan Peterson. I'm on the board at Poudre Valley REA, Rural Electric Association, which is a cooperative, not a profit-making utility company. So, I'm perfectly happy to not earn money off of things that we do to benefit people, because the whole purpose of our organization is to benefit the people who own it, which is everybody that gets served by it. But I recently toured the Jack's Solar Garden agrivoltaic installation, and I was kind of surprised to learn that when they envisioned this initially, they're in Boulder County, they went to the county government and had difficulties getting a permit to do the work because it was zoned agricultural, and they said, oh, photovoltaics are not agricultural. So can you speak to the issue of government regulations and how those might change to more enable these kinds of things?
Mark, you want to take a shot? You go.
Yeah, so if you haven't been to Jack's Solar Garden, it's one of the largest installations, agrivoltaics installations in the country, as far as I'm aware. And so it's just down the road from us. We have that great resource right here to visit and just see what it looks like and understand it better, which does bring up the question about how supportive the county level and the state level regulations may or may not be. It definitely varies by state. Those traditional fossil fuels economies states, Wyoming comes to mind, it may be less favorable to photovoltaics development. And it depends on, in this case, Boulder County has an interest in maintaining that agricultural legacy and kind of visual appeal of what agriculture brings to the landscape. And I think they entered into that thinking the traditional model is that we take 30 acres, we clear it of other use, and sometimes literally scrape it down and clear it of other use to make the photovoltaics as efficient as possible and as easy to maintain as possible. And so that's probably what they initially envisioned. And I think Byron there at Jack's Solar Garden convinced them otherwise, that there can be this co-location of the two. And once you get a precedent, then it maybe is easier to kind of replicate that. But it just within Colorado, it varies from Weld County to Boulder County to Larimer County. There's a wide variety of acceptance there. And I think that's, if you live in those areas, talking to the folks that make those decisions and convincing them, because I think that's what happened in Jack's Solar Garden's case.
Yeah, so a lot of the stuff we do, we're bringing this out to rural communities, and sometimes you mention agrivoltaics and you just roll their eyes, like what, oh, right, they've just assumed put it on the corner of a center pivot. sort of buy into that thing yet. Ellison, I was going to ask you a question. So this idea of transitioning, what about like rural communities, like in Colorado versus, like, I mean, you work mostly on the Front Range and you've had a lot of international experience. I mean, what's your sense about getting those communities to transition? It would seem to be easier in those places just because of the scaling of it. I don't, maybe not. I don't know. I'm like, how do you get those people to really think differently about this?
I'm not sure that it's easier, but I think it is a worthwhile comparison between urban and semi-urban and
Right.
rural settings. I think someone earlier mentioned self-sufficiency, wanting homes to be self-sufficient. I think where people live, if they have the luxury to choose, sometimes reflects that desire for self-sufficiency. And so in a state like Colorado, a lot of decision-making has been left to more local municipalities or counties. That seems to reflect what people want. And in that sense, maybe the transitions wouldn't happen as quickly. I probably take more the view that allowing for a diversity of choices is maybe better in the long run for societal peace. But
Sure.
that's a personal view maybe that has come out of my own work.
Right.
I think my encounters, my experience, both living and working with people in rural settings, is that they may really value the option to choose what they do rather than be told what to do. In the United States, it's different. In other places I've worked, certainly China's a very different context.
Right.
I think the other thing that comes to mind is creating opportunities for rural communities to have access to choices and not limiting their choice set just because of the distance. However, I think there are options that are much harder to deliver when the distance is greater. So,
Right. Okay. Great. Carol. Yeah.
I just wanted to add to that because this is a story I love to share. Governor Ritter, back when he was really governor, not just calling him that, loves to tell a story that he passed it's a very technical, nerdy piece of legislation. He got it through the state legislature around transmission access for renewable energy. And he loves to brag that he brought together the most liberal and most conservative legislators in the state, because somebody from probably Boulder County who wanted access to renewables, mostly wind, and a woman from eastern Colorado who was one of the most conservative legislatures, but they saw that as economic development. Wind power allows ranchers and farmers to stay on their land with the extra money that they earn. And so that was one of those collaborations that rural and urban can come together because they all have the same interest in the end.
Right. I have a question over here.
Hi, I'm Bob Massaro. We have a lot of rooftops, and we're building a lot more rooftops right now. What can we do to encourage solar location on rooftops? And would that make any difference in the total energy demand that we have?
Well, I'll tell you from a residential level, I live in a net zero house. I got my house more and more and more efficient until I could afford enough solar to basically make me net zero carbon on an annual basis, not hour by hour. So it's way easier to do at a residential level. I tell people there are not enough roofs on the CSU campus to even we can't make a significant dent in the electric use at CSU with just rooftops. We have to look at large ground mount. If you look at what Stanford University has done to get their campus to net zero, they have a huge multi-hundred acre solar plant out away from campus in the middle of the desert somewhere of California that they contract with the utility to count that green power towards their university. So for a large institution like CSU with very energy intensive lab buildings, we can't do commercial buildings. Now I say that NREL is net zero, but they've got solar on parking garages and everywhere out there, and they've made uber efficient buildings. So you can do it. It is possible. It's just really hard on a commercial building.
All right. Question back here.
Hi, my name's Anna, and I'm an MS student here. I used to live in California and work as a energy policy analyst there. And I was wondering, in Colorado, if there's much conversation around the cost of rooftop solar to like the grid and ratepayers as a whole, where like looking at who is kind of bearing the cost of incentive programs for selling energy back to the grid, and what are ratepayers who don't have solar on their house. Like, I'm a renter, I have no possibility of putting solar or selling solar energy back to the grid. So like, are there conversations around the cost to ratepayers of big rooftop solar versus utility solar? And if that's too specific of a question, feel free to move on.
Well, California is complicated because, okay, there's a weird thing they talk about called the duck curve, which you probably know about, which has to do when solar stops producing, and all of a sudden they've got this huge ramp up of load in the afternoon that they have to meet. But the reality of that is the utilities have never been perfect at pricing electricity. I am a grid connect. I pay $24.50 every month for the privilege of being connected to the grid to use that as my battery. Is that a fair price? We could argue. REA has threatened to make it $50, and my argument back to them was, when I didn't have solar, you didn't charge me $50 for what you sold me. So you clearly were not recovering all your costs before I got solar. So the question is not really, what does the pricing infrastructure look like for solar? It's like for all electricity. If we made it uber fair, then people who lived in rural areas would pay a lot more for electricity because there's a lot more wires to get the electricity to their house. And would that be fair? That's not how we play the electricity game generally. So it's a very, very complicated question, and goes back to storage and all kinds of other things to try to solve those impacts of when renewables come on and off the grid.
Jesse, anything? I mean,
I can't say what Colorado is thinking on that, because I don't actually know what the regulators are thinking, but it's an interesting question. Are you thinking about like the social justice issue? Yeah, so the idea is, as more solar panels are on rooftops, you're going to be selling that power to the grid. You're lowering total demand by doing that, and the utilities still have to recover their fixed costs, their investments of millions of dollars for building a coal plant or a natural gas plant. And so those costs are passed on to us, ratepayers, and if you have a solar panel on your house, you're paying less than somebody else that doesn't have a solar panel. And so the houses, the low-income houses, are going to ultimately end up paying more. And so I'm sure Colorado regulators are thinking, I hope they're thinking about that as they start to think about how we get to net zero by 2032.
Right.
I mean, that's a huge challenge.
My question.
Well, can I follow up first?
No, go, Ellison. Yeah, go ahead.
Because I don't think it'll be satisfying to the question, but one initiative that many in this room might already be familiar with is the Justice 40 initiative. If you've heard of it, you might have heard it as it's coming from a federal level. So if it's new to you, it's the idea, or not the idea, but it's currently on paper and not yet in practice, that 40% of the benefits that come from investments in the climate and clean energy transition funded through bills that have just been passed, 40% of those benefits get passed on to disadvantaged communities. And if you remember one thing, it's not 40% of the incentives or 40% of the dollars, it's 40% of the benefits. And so something that Jesse said earlier that I think is really important is defining those benefits is still up in the air. So if you define a benefit, on the basis of getting money back because you have solar on your roof, then those benefits aren't necessarily going to a renter who doesn't have the option to recoup, or win that benefit. But if we were to evaluate the social cost of carbon or the social cost of mining minerals that are needed for those photovoltaics, and account for things in such a way that we're adequately addressing all benefits, or at least more comprehensively benefits, then I think we can start to get a better picture of what would be an equitable transition. But we have to value that at a level where that takes priority over other decisions, if that's what we value. And the Justice 40 initiative is trying to place a value on distributing benefits to people that are disadvantaged that may not be able to directly benefit from a dollar being spent in one place. So I don't know. again, not maybe the most satisfying, but I think it's worth knowing about.
There was a discussion earlier about externalities, which I think are fundamental to environmental issues, of course. Do economists or others think about like energy reliability as an externality? And, particularly with what the world's gone through. So I'll just leave it at that, I guess.
That's actually a question on my final in my energy.
You want to give the answer now, Jess? Go ahead. Let's go ahead. Give the answer.
Yeah. Externalities to whom, I guess. I would think of it as what are we talking about? Renewables are intermittent, right? We don't know exactly when they're going to produce. We know at least for solar, it's not going to produce in the middle of the night because the sun's not there. But if a cloud comes over, then the solar production is going to come down, and then fossil fuels are going to have to ramp up, and that's a drain on their. That's causing extra damage to their machines, and so that's kind of the externality I think of when I think of intermittency. Yeah, we definitely think about it. That's the short answer, but it's unpriced right now. I mean, you could tax solar and wind to deal with that, but that would be. I won't go.
But
go
then
there.
we could tax carbon and.
Exactly.
Right,
We should tax carbon
tax the
first.
carbon first,
Yeah.
right?
There we go. Reliability is something that the electric utilities are tasked with providing. So the arguments about intermittency with renewable energy, it's real. I mean, you can't dispute that. But how do you address that? And of course, a lot of people want to say, oh, you just have to stick with fossil fuels. I'm more inclined to go with batteries and other types of storage. There are storage schemes that don't involve batteries, compressed air, sand, water. There are lots of options, lots of opportunities for things to happen. But when it comes to inequality because of rooftop solar, that's why Carroll pays a $24 a month
$24.50.
facilities charge. We actually did a study, had a consultant do a study, and he said for residential class, that's what we pay per customer to maintain our lines. It didn't come up because of solar. It came up because we had vacation cabins up in the mountains that turned off their power every summer for 6 or 8 months. And we said, well, you're not paying your fair share. So we devised this scheme to have a facilities charge that covers the cost of maintaining the lines. And since we have done that, there is no question of people putting rooftop solar in taking advantage of everybody else. They're not, because everybody pays their fair share to maintain the system.
Other questions? Yeah.
Hi. Yeah, I had a question about the Inflation Reduction Act. I do some volunteer work with the city's climate team and so forth, and I know we're trying to figure out how to take best advantage of that, especially for low-income communities, because there's some pretty large incentive there for them. But there's always the issue of how to connect with those communities and get them on board, and then also with, as you mentioned, with the owners of rental properties, because they aren't necessarily, even though their tenants may be low income, they are not. And so I don't know if you have any ideas about the best way to try and communicate with those disadvantaged groups and make them aware of what's available, and then also get them on board with trying to take advantage of some of the incentives there.
Okay, can I tell you about a really weird pie-in-the-sky fantasy thing we're trying to do under the IRA? We wanted to put a canopy solar system over the Westfall parking lot, but if you guys know anything about solar, canopies are one of the most expensive ways to mount solar, so it didn't pencil, and it got kicked out of our last group of projects. But with the IRA, there's a higher tax credit for the third-party people that are developing it if they involve low income. So imagine, this is by far not real. This is a fantasy that you guys can all help me realize. So say Westfall parking lot develops into a 1 point something megawatt solar system. 49% of it can go to of the electrons can go to CSU to help meet our electric load. 51% goes to low-income housing in the community, low-income customers in the community, and we retain the environmental attributes for the whole thing to help us meet our climate action plan. So we get electricity at a hedged rate that's fixed for 28 years, just like we did all the other 20 projects on this last round. So it's an incredible benefit for the university. We can provide lower cost electricity to the people in the community that need it, and we're using real estate in a way that's not, again, co-benefits. We're parking cars underneath it, not growing plants, but we're co-benefits. And we retain the environmental attributes of the whole site to give us traction towards our carbon reduction goals. So that's one of the ways we're trying to play the IRA. It is a million miles from reality because it involves the city changing policy. So if you're on a city team, lean on them a little bit to help us figure out how to make this happen. But think of it as a community solar project that would be housed on campus. So anyway, that's our fantasy about how to play in the IRA, and I think everybody's trying to figure out how to play in it right now, but that's ours.
Carol, just briefly, the climate action plan, you want to give it what that is for CSU, just like quickly, like a...
We wrote our original climate action plan in 2010.
Right.
Okay. We've updated it every 2 or 3 years. Okay. With COVID, it was a 4-year, but okay, everything got delayed by COVID. Climate action plan is 8 broad strategies to get the university to carbon neutral by 2040. And it's all around energy. For those of you that don't know, 75% of our footprint is energy between natural gas and electricity.
Great. Okay. Other questions? There we go.
Could I follow up?
Yeah, go for it,
on that
Ellison.
question?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I think, I really like the question about, how can you actually engage with communities that might be in the most need and maybe unaware of what's available.
Right.
And so I think what first comes to my mind is thinking about disadvantaged communities as being highly diverse. Students that live around CSU and on CSU campus are faced with some of the same trade-offs that low-income families are, of heat or eat, or the rent eats first, if people have heard that phrase.
Right.
Meaning that the kinds of trade-offs that people are facing really do come down to money and the cost of things.
Right.
But engaging with people that manage the spaces that they live and work in is well worth the investment of money to build those relationships if they don't already exist, and maintain a community engaged approach where relationship building is as important as figuring out where the technology is going to be installed and how much it's going to cost. I'm sure that's probably already evident and obvious to you, but I think the relationship building is as important, because dropping in on communities and saying we have something for you when that's not what they're saying they need is a quick way to not really solve any of the problems that either groups have. So
That's a great point. Anyway, we had a question, 2 questions. We had a question. Who was somebody right here in my face? Yeah, let's go.
Hi, maybe my question is for Jesse or Ellison or Mark. In full disclosure, Carol's my supervisor, my boss, so
You better not ask me a question.
maybe she can answer, but last. So my name's Stacy. I'm the campus energy coordinator at CSU, so I work with Carol. Trying to help us reduce electricity consumption on campus might be one of my main focuses. So this is why I'm asking Jesse and Ellison in particular, because sometimes I jokingly describe my job as trying to teach professors how to turn off light switches. So, not to say that anyway, anyone in this room is guilty of leaving a light on in an empty room, but given the split incentive and just given what you know about how people work and how a large institution works, or what you've learned working with individual homeowners, what advice do you have for me in helping to communicate to campus, turn off lights in empty rooms?
I've never actually turned my light on in my office.
All right.
I don't either, for the record.
Do you monitor electricity consumption in every single office?
No.
That's going to be a challenge because what you said, the misalignment of incentives. We have a problem with renters, right? Renters sometimes don't pay their own electricity bills. The landlord does. And so they have absolutely no incentive to change their behavior because they don't see the price. That's the same with us in our buildings. I was thinking if you monitored electricity consumption for every person, you could then do one of these comparison things where you could say, I used so much electricity and it's more than Ellison and Mark, and therefore I'm a bad person or something like that, and I should use less.
Yeah, so we should punish you.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And then you could, conversely, you say, I use less than Mark and Ellison, and they get an opposite letter, and then they change their behavior. But we don't have that kind of data, so that makes it a challenge. We could talk afterwards. I'd be interested in talking about that.
Ellison, any comment on that? Yeah.
I think there's been some recent exploration in what does it look like to break down that split incentive, particularly thinking about property managers and owners and the renters. Maybe a different example than what Jesse gave, where the property manager's paying the bill and so the renter doesn't have the incentive to conserve. On the flip side, we've engaged with renters even here in Fort Collins where they are paying their electric bill, they would like the energy efficiency, but the benefit goes to them and the cost goes to the property manager. So one of my friends that works in the Office of Energy Justice at the federal level has been exploring some their experiments of what does it look like to share both the cost and the benefit, and making the bill shared across the renter and the property owner seems to bring both to the table at least. I think that model hasn't really been explored. Not here, but really across the United States, and that would be an interesting model. I mean, I don't know actually if those in the room that are involved in co-ops have more of that sort of shared cost, shared benefits mindset, and that might, could emerge from housing co-ops, but I haven't seen it yet.
Okay, great. We have a question back here.
Hi, my name's Mindy. I work with the Center for Environmental Justice. And I just wanted to get to meet you in person. I just wanted to make everybody aware, and especially you with the city, that the EPA, as part of the IRA funds, has rolled out billions of dollars in grant funding, and CSU, through the CEJ, has applied to become a technical assistance center, an environmental justice technical assistance center. So regardless of whether or not we are awarded that contract, someone in Region 8 will become this technical assistance center. And the whole purpose is to connect people in need with this funding, to kind of shortcut and remove some of the barriers that are there that exist to, make it tough for people to access funding. So look for that information when that rolls out. Hopefully it'll be CSU leading the charge, but regardless, I'll send that to all of you because we need to utilize that resource.
Awesome.
Yeah. Sure.
That was just like last week or something? It was.
The awards haven't actually been named. So we applied back November 1st. We were supposed to know February 1st. We'll actually know, they think, by the end of March. So, yeah.
Good luck. Yeah, that's awesome.
Here we go.
I've heard that the commercial power companies have a disincentive for homeowners to have renewable energy because once you give them so much, they say, okay, you've given us like way more than is effective for us to like handle you, so we're just going to flip off your switch and say we're not going to pay you, we're not going to buy your energy anymore. So wouldn't that make a sense that we should just like tell the power company to just flip over and be totally renewable energy, as opposed to continually have this fight where homeowners just say like, what's the point of going renewable if they're just going to cut me off when I'm that good?
Well, the net metering law in Colorado used to say you could produce up to 120% of your annual kilowatt hours. So you could push back an extra 20% onto the grid on a net annual basis. And the utility company had to reimburse you at retail rates. So basically, we push back a little bit. I think I told you that on Foothills campus. And so we get a bill that says you took this much off the grid, you put this much on the grid, and then we're billed on the difference. So we get full retail credit for what we push onto the grid. That's awesome. That makes the economics way better. If you produce more, now, they've changed that law and it's 200% now, so it's very generous. But if you go above that, it's a long story, but you are now in the category of a wholesale power producer. And it's not that they don't have to buy your power, but they buy it to you for a fraction. It's wholesale power rates. It's your economics go through the floor at that point. So it's just it has to do with back to the transmission grid and if you suddenly put 300 kilowatts in your backyard, and for the record, most homes use between 5 and 10. So if you had a big backyard and you put 300 kilowatts in your backyard, they don't have the wires to take that out of your neighborhood. So it has to do with supporting the grid, but also supporting solar, because the net metering law in Colorado is awesome. That has done a lot for solar development in our state.
Carol, I was gonna. So, what kind of Can you just give me a sense of what would be the investment by the state of Colorado if you just wanted to go take all the land that we have in eastern Colorado and turn it into? Somehow. What would be It just seems to me that every time when solar became available, it was because subsidized, right? You get the tax return and this whole thing. And now I was reading a proposal on hydrogen energy, and all of a sudden somebody told me hydrogen's going to pay now, because the subsidies coming through for the power companies.
I've been in this world a long time, and when I started in solar,
right.
we were paying $15 a watt
right.
for 10 kilowatt system, and it's down to a couple of bucks now, depending on the scale of your system.
Right.
So that's what happens in the world when a technology advances
right.
through. Economists could talk about that much more effectively than I have. But
right.
what those trajectories look like and when those are going to make sense, it's up to the thing is that we need to get to externalities. We need to make sure that everybody's paying their, we've talked about a lot of things tonight. Okay, everybody has to pay for their share of the grid if they want to use it for about, I pay my $24.50 a month to use the grid as my battery. But is that a fair and equitable? We could talk about that, Frankly, if REA wants to make it $50, I'll do what they call grid defection and put my own batteries in. Frankly, I don't, but I'm a nerd. I would do that, So
right.
I don't think grid defection is probably a huge threat to most utilities, but it is an interesting time to see how all this plays out. I think as we look at all the cost of ozone on the Front Range and all these other things, that we need to think really hard about what we want to invest in a cleaner future, because we can't keep burning stuff, in Scott Denning's infamous words, although he says it a little more bluntly than that. So.
Right, yeah. Okay, other questions from the audience? Yeah,
Carol,
right over here. Oh, great, go ahead. Yeah, go.
I was just going to kind of frame it for those who may not be familiar, but is it CSU's energy independence goal 2030? Is that
2030 for 100% renewable electricity, and 2040 for total carbon neutrality. There are two different goals.
And then at the state level, so Colorado's state level goals are 2040 for renewable, 100% renewable energy at the state level. And then nationally, by 2050, the goal is to go decarbonize the grid, if at all possible. And so, those are pretty near goals, and I don't know if we'll hit them or not, but the 2031 is very close, 2040 isn't all that far off, and nor is 2050. And so when we think about those questions, I think we have to take in all the new information, including solar has dropped in price so much that it's really, we're seeing the installations go up for that reason, to meet those demands. And the way I think about it from a agrivoltaics perspective is kind of how much, I don't know the cost, the actual dollar amount, but I do know kind of the approximate land area. that it would take to get there, and it's about 0.5% of the continuous U.S. land area for photovoltaics to meet those goals that I just mentioned. So it's a tiny, tiny fraction of the total U.S. land area. And so it's in many ways more now than 10 years ago, 20 years ago. It's possible. And so I want to make sure we're kind of ending on something positive as well. So, but reminding us what those goals are and positive.
I heard a number years ago, and I don't know if it's true. It's about the equivalent land area of the interstate road system.
I would also add, as some of these other barriers come down, the pathway looks clear. A few others that are worth noting, though, are the need for transmission lines to carry electricity and the need for permits that allow that infrastructure to be put in place. And the other is the minerals needed from a mining perspective. I'm not a mining engineer, but several of the geoengineering faculty that I'm with have been talking about the demand on the mining industry, how long it takes to get a mine set up. And right now the workforce is woefully understaffed. Consulting companies are turning down opportunities because they have no one to hire. And so the need for people that are trained as engineers that can work in mining sites and managing the life cycle of getting the minerals we need to support the infrastructure that's now becoming cheaper are non-trivial barriers to meeting some of these 2030, 2040, 2050 goals.
My name is Patrick Murphy. This question is for Ellison, and it may just be a yes or no answer, but the experience you had in China sounds like it might be similar to the work that's been done, for example, in the Navajo Nation, trying to deal with individual homes long not connected to the grid. And I didn't know if you were doing any work in applying that experience at home here, even in places as close as, Arizona and New Mexico.
I haven't worked necessarily with Native American communities or Navajo Nation, but I would say working with populations that are rural, more dispersed, in some cases by choice or by the passage of time and the loss of relationships, somewhat disenfranchised. I think what I've observed is the need for reliability for energy. So speaking to the China experience that I've had, in the communities that I've worked in, there's been, by and large, an embrace of the new fuel or new technology to provide heating and cooking, but there isn't a suspension or abandonment of what has worked for decades in those homes. So in the settings I've worked in, people haven't been asked to give up their coal stove or have it destroyed or taken away. Instead, it stays in their home, and they may use it less, but they're not ceasing to use it entirely. The fraction of people that stop using the old thing and embrace the new thing fully is a very small fraction, and generally even those households that maybe, let's say, use all electricity after being given the infrastructure, the capital costs have been addressed, the operating costs have been addressed, they still have their coal boiler in a room that's available should they need it. And I don't say that with any, that's a bad thing. It's not a bad thing. It's a desire for reliability and energy security at a household level. I think that need must be addressed. And where I see that relating to what I do here is recognizing that when people are cold, they need to heat their home that day. Not heating their home makes them suffer, and that suffering is something that they want to alleviate as quickly as they can, especially when it involves other members of their family that might be even more at need. So the reliability piece has been a common theme of what I observe. And the desire to embrace new things is not something that people are openly resistant to, but it has to fit within the context of other needs that they have. I don't know if that speaks to your question. I haven't worked with the populations you were mentioning, but I think the lessons I've learned by working at the household level have been that need for reliability, and then everything else sort of can flow after that, but it comes first.
Okay, we get the back row here.
I was just wondering, so we were talking about the whole mining industry, and there's a lot of mining that has to go on to create all this power supply system and batteries and such. And we were talking about the sustainability goals within the next 20, 30, 40 years. I was wondering, once we hit those goals of being 100% sustainable, renewable energy, are we going to see like a dramatic decrease in those mining emissions, those really terrible stuff that the whole mining industry is producing? I was wondering like if you guys had any thoughts on that.
Better the circular economy.
I can speak from the conversations I've had with my colleagues. I find their work in the mining realm really interesting. One thing that they've mentioned that I think is important is that the mining industry as a whole is not monolithic. It has a distribution of actors, like almost in any industry. There's been, in the recent past, a shift towards mining companies, or let's say segments of that industry, embracing practices that are cleaner, more efficient, and more aligned with some of these goals around sustainability and reducing emissions and reducing pollution or pollution-free, not saying pollution-free mining, but that managing the pollutants that come from a mining operation are a part of the operations of a larger fraction of that industry. It's certainly not every member of that sector, but it's a large enough one that I'm not sure that we need to view it as, will we get through our mining need and then be clean, rather that process can become a cleaner process, and that's an exciting space to work in right now.
Yeah, I mean, we had some engineers, mining engineers, and they were saying the same thing. It's not the mining of the 60s and 70s anymore. A whole new generation of people, and they're becoming heroes now, environmental heroes in a lot of ways.
And we also need to get way better at a circular economy. Design products.
Cradle to cradle.
Cradle to cradle, so that it, waste is food, all that when a solar panel reaches end of life, we figure out how to grind it up and make it into a new solar panel.
Other questions? Getting close to the end here, everybody. Yeah. Right.
This is so good to be able to be in a place and hear this kind of helpful feedback and wisdom. And I reflect on this a lot because having been at CSU a long time ago and seeing the transition now to where we are, it's amazing. I am so proud of this place. I really am. What I was thinking about was accolades, for one thing. CSU has obtained a lot of accolades in recent years for its work around energy efficiency and other eco-friendly things, and how that fits in with the goals that you have, the big goals, the net zero. Do those accolades help, do you think? Are they helping you be more competitive, perhaps? Maybe this is for Carol mostly, but I'm wondering how you view this milieu that you're in for trying to get better and achieve your goals, and Stacy's part of that too. And so it's like, I'm so happy to see this happening, but are you feeling good about where you are in terms of getting there? And are there areas that are just really tough that you won't be able to maybe get where you want, but just
For those of you that know me, it's never good enough.
It's never good.
Okay, just
Anyway,
whatever.
just some feedback on how you see you're getting where you need to go. And
I think the most important thing for us is that we were told many years ago, oh, this green thing, that's just a fad, kids will be onto something else. But we have to remember as a university, and for the students in the room, don't take this personally, but we have a constituency, you could call them customers, you can call them whatever you want, that we have to keep attracting to the university. There's a crisis in higher ed right now. There's less kids coming out of high school. We're competing for a smaller pool of students. If we don't have an institution that students want to come to, we are a failure. Our business will fail. And you can call it a business, you cannot. But, these are things that we have to think about. And what we do know is through surveying and this, not only do something like 90+% of our students say sustainability is moderately to very extremely important, and that's why one of the big reasons they pick CSU, but the one I really love is their parents put our sustainability cred as one of the big reasons that they encourage their children to come to CSU. So it's always great that the students love us. And what I really love, it's a feedback loop. Okay, we get students that care about sustainability come to CSU and they look at us and like, not good enough, guys, so we're going to push you on this thing. And so students have pushed us in composting. The students paid for a solar system on top of the Lurie Student Center. The students are pushing us in many ways. So they push us to be more sustainable, which attracts more sustainable students, so it's a positive feedback loop. So I think it's really good. And so the accolades help us in that recruitment, which is honestly the core of what we do. If we don't have good programs, we're a failure, but if we don't meet the student's need, we're a failure too.
Right. And it's in all over campus, right? I mean, when we started, it wasn't that way, and it's just amazing, isn't it? Yeah, it's incredible.
Every corner of campus, from social justice centers to the environmental work that we're doing
Yeah.
in facilities, to the teaching and research
Yeah.
that SoGES is doing.
It's a part of our
For
DNA.
those of you that know anything about the STARS recording that we just got platinum in for the 4th time, but yeah, whatever. There is 1,000 questions in that questionnaire, from everything. We get credit from everything to how our endowment is invested to what they do in SoGES.
Right.
So that's everybody. It's a broad spectrum.
Right. Let's go down to Mark. What about you? I mean, when you were hired, I mean, you're a stellar, horticulturalist, and now you're working in solar. So how does this play with your work, and where do you see it going? Like, what would be your aspiration for this? Yeah.
I think we're confronted with really large challenges, and what I used to maybe call a kind of crazy solution, I've learned to just kind of embrace.
Nice.
And I'm the one saying that it's crazy when other folks that I show it to go, that makes perfect sense.
Wow.
And I think the other part that I was thinking about earlier today was my kids. I have 4 boys, all under the age of 10.
Bless you.
And they guilt trip me all the time. Like, we're inheriting this world. And they say things like, when are we buying an electric vehicle? When are we going to sell our minivan? And I'm like, instead of, can we afford it?
Right. You should say, do you want to go to college?
Might that happen? It's like, when will this happen?
Right.
So it's our students, but it's our kids. It's our, that inspire me and help me to think kind of outside the box. And that's been really great.
That's great. Ellison, similarly, I mean, you've worked, overseas in China and everything, and now you're here on the Front Range, probably one of the most rapidly growing areas of the country. Where do you see your work going, and where do you see the opportunities to sort of really advance the science and the I guess really also the adoption, right? I mean, that's what you're really into. So what do you see happening there?
I mean, I think something that's been really exciting about coming here to Colorado, to a land-grant institution that values working locally, is that I get to work in the place that I live. And I think as much as I've learned from working well outside of my cultural norms, I think I value working with people that I can relate to from a very personal level.
Mm-hmm.
I think where I see things, things that excite me presently, and there are some in the room that I have worked with and work in similar fashion as engineers, is the embrace of social sciences and engineering sciences as we work in systems that inherently embed people and their decisions, whether that's at the household level, at a community level, or at a a larger scale like municipal level. I think seeing the work that happens when we work across disciplines really excites me, because we learn a lot about how to build systems that people want to embrace and adopt, and I think working with us, people learn about what's possible from the technological standpoint.
Great, that's great. Jesse, with your work.
Sure. So I think everything I've done so far in research has been national, or in a place I don't live. I just gathered data. Actually I did work in Fort Collins for a little bit, but we gather data, we run regressions, statistics on the data, and then we tell somebody else what happened or so forth. And something I'd really like to do, I just got tenure, so I'm going to transition away from...
Good for you.
Yeah. I'd like to start working more with the utility here in Fort Collins, if possible, or with maybe Carol or somebody, to actually make something. It would be great to actually see a solar farm develop or something that I helped develop.
Sure.
Be part of, instead of just writing a paper about
Right.
what it's going to do to the grid.
Excellent. Carol, maybe finish up with you've been here a while, you've been involved in the energy game. What is our opportunity to take our spirit of the campus across the entire state? I mean, we have the new campus in Denver. Isn't that
That's
an
great.
amazing
Spur
opportunity?
campus is beautiful for
Right.
those of you that haven't been there.
Yeah.
And they have a very lofty mission. Let's just put it at that. I think it's awesome. One thing I learned at CSU a long time ago is that never expect it to happen tomorrow.
Right.
But this Titanic has been turning for a long time, and I love the direction we're heading in now, and I love all the students that push us hard every day. And back to kids, I have grandkids now.
Oh, Jesus,
and
Carol.
yeah, 4 of them. So yeah, just looking at those kids in the eyes every day going,
Yeah.
you got to keep doing the work because we got to leave them a livable planet. So,
Okay, everybody,
yeah.
let's give the panel a round of applause. Good job tonight. Everybody, thanks for coming. We had an amazing conversation. You guys did an excellent job tonight. Thank you very much for joining us. On behalf of the School of Global Environmental Sustainability, our director, Diana Wall, everybody, thank you for coming. Keep your eye open for sustainability events, and if you're going to go home, be careful, and if you're riding your bike, wear your helmet. Okay, everybody, take care. Have a nice night.